TC, you ever been to Denver?
I have been to Denver. Yeah, I have
Denver's
cousins
nice.
in Denver. Yeah, I have cousins outside of Denver. I've been to weddings with them in Denver. It's fantastic. I could live there.
I remember being in Denver for the 2008 Democratic National Convention with our mutual friend Kenny.
How fantastic is that?
That was the night that I was in a super box with the entire cast of Mad Men.
And didn't appreciate it.
Didn't appreciate it because the show was just beginning.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, Steve Cordasco got a telephone call from listeners of mine in Denver. A couple of my listeners got hit with a large and unexpected tax bill. They're self-employed, were about to lose their tax credit for health care coverage because they exceeded the income limits. Bottom line, Steve assigns to this Tim Joseph, on-staff CPA. I know Tim well. He did an analysis, uncovered additional expenses, and further depreciated their rental properties, which reduced their taxable income, turned an unexpected tax bill into a $4,000 refund. Call Cordasco, 855-558-3500. Cordasco Financial Network, that's a trade name owned by Mercer Global Advisors, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Securities offered through Andrew Garrett, Inc., not affiliated with Cordasco Financial Network or Mercer Advisors. Client experiences will vary. Successful outcomes are not guaranteed. Headlines now from Smerconish.com, the newsletter. 12,489 votes cast yesterday. How do we feel about that? 12,489.
About the number of votes? I feel great about that. Do you not feel good about that?
I think I do.
Do you have a new line?
No. I was explaining to somebody yesterday in terms of how many people typically vote. I mean, you never know on a Saturday. We had like more than 35,000 on Saturday.
Yeah, that's true.
That was on the Ron DeSantis related question. This was Joe Biden inspired. I didn't put the president's name in the question because I thought it would have poisoned the well and people would have voted for or against Biden instead of just answering the question, which was, is the pandemic over?
How did you vote?
Yes.
You voted yes, it was over.
I voted yes.
Yeah, I voted yes too, but it's also obviously more nuanced than that. It's sort of a game of name that thing. Like COVID isn't over. COVID is still with us. People are dying. People are getting
totally
it. But the pandemic part of COVID is,
well,
I believe, over.
Okay, so I think when I voted, I think what my vote was predicated on was on a day-to-day basis as I go about, my daily life. Is COVID on the brain? Not at all for me.
Oh, interesting.
Not at all. Is it for you?
I haven't been back to a movie theater. I've flown
because you wouldn't.
I
haven't been back to a movie theater because movies suck.
I flew and I didn't wear a mask. That's interesting, right?
It doesn't impact me at all. The only time I think about it is when I'm in a grocery store and some people are masked up. I'm like, oh wow, okay,
yeah, definitely
interesting.
I think we would all be healthier if we wore masks all the time.
I didn't get sick.
I didn't get sick.
I didn't get sick at all. I agree. Totally agree.
Right.
Wash your hands.
Yes.
Wash your hands. Is the pandemic over? 53% say yes. Thinking of yesterday's program, in the second hour of yesterday's program, and I think I'll be releasing Nicholas Eberstadt as a book club.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
in other words, as opposed to the daily podcast.
Yesterday, Buzz Bissinger was my guest talking about the Mosquito Bowl.
I can't stop thinking about that.
And I'm going to release that as a book club today.
Perfect.
And then I think Nicholas Eberstadt's book will be the focus of probably Fridays soon.
Friday maybe could be Nina Totenberg.
Okay,
and then we can,
soon.
Yeah,
soon.
Like in the next 5 days.
Here's the point. He is an economist at the American Enterprise Institute, and interestingly, after his appearance yesterday, dropped for the Washington Post an essay that he wrote, "What's Behind the Flight from Work in Post-Pandemic America?" An issue that completely caught me unaware. NILF, NILF, make your own jokes at home, not in labor force is what it stands for. These not in labor force men who now outnumber the formerly unemployed by 4 to 1. Are the main reason that the country's prime male work level has been driven below a 1940 level when national unemployment rates were nearly 15%. In other words, he argues that the United States has a depression scale work problem. And it's a lot of disability and it's a lot of dependence on prescription drugs as well. A really interesting issue that doesn't get enough attention. Today's poll question, is Putin bluffing? Is Putin bluffing? Videotaped address that he delivered this morning, our time. I saw it as the story broke at about 5 a.m. in the backdrop as I was doing my own read-in. He has announced a partial mobilization, calling up roughly 300,000 reservists. He accused the United States and Europe of engaging in nuclear blackmail against the country and warned that Russia has lots of weapons of its own. Quote, to those who allow themselves such statements about Russia, I want to remind you that our country also has various means of destruction, and some components are more modern than those of NATO countries. Then he said this, if the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will certainly use all the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff. So today's poll question asks if it's a bluff. I mean, he is saber rattling and talking about nuclear weapons. Is it a bluff? Thomas Friedman has a piece. You would think in reading the Friedman piece that he published it after Putin's speech this morning, but no, he published it yesterday with a dateline of Munich. This is The World is Flat, Tom Friedman from the Times, saying, quote, last week was an interesting week to be in Europe talking to national security experts, business executives, and so forth about Ukraine. Ukraine and its allies had just forced Russian invaders into a chaotic retreat from a big chunk of territory, while the presidents of China and India had seemed to make clear to Vladimir Putin that the food and energy inflation his war stoked was hurting their 2.7 billion people. On top of that, one of Russia's iconic pop stars told her 3.4 million followers on Instagram that the war was, quote, turning our country into a pariah and worsening the lives of its citizens. In short, it was Putin's worst week since he invaded Ukraine. And then, says Tom Friedman, prescient, and yet, maybe I was just hanging around the wrong people. But I detected a certain undertow of anxiety in many of my conversations with Ukraine's European allies. It's a very sense of foreboding by Friedman before Putin started threatening the use of nuclear weapons. So Tom Friedman, as he's done in the past, then tries to game theory, how might this end? The short version is option one, or outcome one, a total Ukrainian victory, which risks Putin doing something crazy as defeat and humiliation stare him in the face. Option two, or outcome two, a dirty deal with Putin that secures a ceasefire and stops the destruction, but it risks splintering the Western allies and enraging many Ukrainians. Outcome three, a less dirty deal. We go back to the lines where everyone was before Putin invaded in February. Ukraine might be ready to live with that, and maybe even the Russian people would too, but Putin would have to be ousted first because he would never abide by the undeniable implication that his war was completely for naught. I said earlier, well, I've said repeatedly, that if politics were a ball, it would be a football because you never know which way it's going to bounce. And when I think about the midterm election cycle, I made a flow chart just in terms of going back 6 months. What did I think would be the primary driver of the electorate? What would be the top of mind issue? So my flow chart is like crime. And then I thought gas prices. This goes back, when gas was $5 a gallon.
This is interesting. What were we thinking about right then? Okay, crime. I remember that.
Gas prices. Yes. And then more broadly, it became inflation, not just gas prices, because inflation was at a 40-year high. Okay. But whoa. Roe versus Wade was overturned. It's got to be abortion.
It's got to be abortion.
And then came Kansas, and then came New York's 19th congressional. Of course it's abortion. Wait a minute. Ron DeSantis just shipped 50 people to Martha's Vineyard. My God, the border is porous. It's the border, stupid. And then Russia. Russia comes back. It's Russia and Ukraine. It's the threat of thermonuclear war. But hold on. Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, is going to speak this afternoon and perhaps announce another rising of interest rates, which are going to affect all of us. Home loans, credit card debt, auto loans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe we're back now to inflation and the economy.
It might be.
You just don't know. I mean, you just cannot
keep
tell.
That chart going and jot down dates. I think that's fascinating.
On that crime,
there's really something there.
On that crime front, I don't know if you remember of all of the American Life in Columns events, the Chicago was an after.
Your mother was there.
My mother was there.
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah, I brought
remember.
Mom.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Chicago was an afternoon event.
Yeah.
Do you happen to remember that we were doing a number of these events at city wineries? And I don't know if you would remember this.
Was Chicago a city winery?
Yes. And It stands out in my mind, the location, which was in the downtown area, but not on the mile per se. But what stands out in my mind is that when we got close to City Winery, I looked out the window and I saw the McDonald's headquarters, or the McDonald's University headquarters.
Oh,
because
okay.
where they come and they train their managers.
Yeah.
So I've always been mindful of McDonald's being Chicago-based.
Okay.
There's an interesting, backing up a few pages to crime being a big issue for the midterm cycle. There is a big editorial today in the Wall Street Journal about McDonald's and the crisis of Chicago because
what's going on?
Because the CEO issued a frank warning about the city's crime and social deterioration. Quote, everywhere I go, I'm confronted by the same question these days. What's going on in Chicago? There's a general sense that our city is in crisis, he said, and the Wall Street Journal argues, and he's right. And then they talk about how they moved their headquarters to the Loop from the suburbs in 2018. And Mr. Kempczynski, I think is the pronunciation, says that they've contributed $2 billion a year in doing so to the local economy. Overall, crime in the city, Chicago, up 38% in 2022 over 2021. And a new city policy this summer made it harder for cops to pursue criminals on foot for minor offenses, which reminds me of Philly cops not going after the guys who are riding those street bikes all over. Also, with politics on the brain and an eye toward the future beyond the midterms, Glenn Youngkin. TC, we need to try and get Glenn Youngkin, the Virginia governor, on the program.
Youngkin. His guy Macaulay is going to help me schedule him.
We'll see. He is now hitting the road, and people are saying that this is somewhat of a trial balloon to see how well does he play outside of Virginia.
So presidential aspirations?
Definitely. And Ted Cruz about to visit before the midterm 17 states.
Wow.
On behalf of Republican candidates who are running this cycle. So, you know,
here we go.
Well, I talk so much recently about DeSantis. Of course, there's Trump, and Trump's got to remain solvent and healthy and unindicted. Tomorrow, there will be an announcement by the New York Attorney General, I believe, pertaining to Trump and his business. It's not going to be Trump individually necessarily, but the point is he's still got a lot of legal risk around him. But then you've got this other tier, you know, DeSantis preeminent among them. And then you drop down and you get to Youngkin and you get to Cruz and I guess you get to Nikki Haley. You saw that one of the new books coming out about Trump said that he was not predisposed to select Haley because of her complexion.
Complexion, in quotes, yes.
So that's out there. I remember saying here that a major milestone for EVs, electric vehicles, will be when the rental market is electric.
Is it?
CNBC today, headline, GM to sell up to 175,000 electric vehicles to Hertz.
Wow.
General Motors has agreed to sell 175,000 electric vehicles to Hertz Global over the next 5 years. The deal calls for GM to start supplying electric vehicles such as the Chevrolet Bolt EV and Bolt EUV to the rental car giant starting the first quarter of next year. The vehicles are expected to be followed by newer EV models on the company's Ultium battery technology, such as the Chevy Blazer and Equinox, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Huh. So coming soon. And I wonder how that works. It's nice that you don't have to fill the gas tank. That's always the issue when you return a rental car. You have to find
funny?
How expensive the gas prices are around a airport, especially.
There's always that issue of, are you going to fill the tank yourself
or pay an exorbitant amount to have them fill it for you?
Right. Now, given that it's so
Wait,
much
do you have to
less,
leave it with a charge? You don't have to leave it with a charge, right? They can charge it when they
there's
get there.
no way you're going to have
Not
to
a
leave it with a
chance.
charge.
Not a chance.
No, because they'll be
just plug it right
equipped.
in.
They'll be equipped
While they're
there
cleaning it.
to do a supercharge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for sure. But no, you raise a really interesting point. I'm trying to think. Do they have the ability? I'm sure they do, to plug in and see how much electric
You use.
or is left. Yeah, I'm sure they can do that calculation.
And they charge you for that, right? Somehow?
I would think that they would, but it'll be a hell of a lot easier
Right.
than stopping at a gas station.
Right.
Montana headline: Health Department says it will comply with transgender birth certificate ruling. We should talk about this. This is something that
Yeah,
allows
that's interesting.
transgenders to go back and change their birth certificate.
Yeah, my understanding is the rule as it stood before now was that the only way you could change your birth certificate is if you were post-op, if you were a post-operative transgender, so that you had had the surgery and the gender confirmation surgery. And now the ruling is that if you are transgender, even if you have not had any surgery, you can go back and change your birth certificate. So that's a very interesting, and it's temporary. It's a temporary ban there. So it's still, I think, not
Montana.
final, but Montana. Yeah.
I haven't thought through the. I mean, I want to provide the path of least resistance for people who are transgender.
Yeah.
I haven't thought through some of the practical ramifications of it. I don't know if there are.
I was
But
going to say, what are they?
I don't know.
I mean, I
Haven't
think it's
thought
all
it
about
through.
everything matching. Do you know what I mean? So it's
Right.
like your name and your gender and your birth certificate and everything's right. That's how I think of it. Let's make everything right. And that's I think what Montana's trying to do.
From Arizona, Dateline, the AZ Mirror, more than 1,600 book titles across 32 states were banned from public
saw that.
schools during the 2021-2020. I hope kids are reading books. I mean, this gives me a sense of optimism. Like, really, are they reaching for
Are
the
they
books?
trying? You're
That's
right.
really great.
Here's the list for you to read.
The bulk of the ban requests come from a handful of right-wing groups pushing for censorship of books that feature, right, you want to know, like, okay, what are they seeking to ban? Well, in line with the story from Montana, they are seeking to ban books that feature LGBTQ plus characters and characters of color. So says a new report that was just issued. What I want to be really clear about the books is that they are a pretext, says Ashley Hope Perez, who is the author of a banned book. Book banning is a proxy war on students who share the marginalized identities of authors and characters in the books under attack, she said. You remember Amy Wax. Amy Wax is the Penn Law professor, my alma mater. She is now facing a disciplinary process because of some of her conduct. She has asked to postpone that process as a result of her battling cancer. We don't wish that upon anybody. But she, of course, was a very unusual guest on this program. This was the interview where suddenly she asked whether we were doing a live broadcast and acted, befuddled and surprised to learn that it was a live broadcast. And then TC read aloud the email where you invited her, which said this will be a live radio broadcast.
Exactly. And she literally stopped talking in the middle. You had me read aloud. She stopped talking. It was one of the most uncomfortable moments I've had working with you.
I felt the need to have Adam Levine in the mix today.
It's in the news.
It's very much
And
in the
by
news.
the way, it continues to be in the news because probably as we're speaking, more women are coming forward.
Right. So the story that I flagged was
you
from
can't-
People.
Can I just say, you can't get away with stuff. Like, why do these guys, gals, anybody think that it's not eventually going to come out?
Adam Levine breaking his silence after he was publicly accused of cheating on his pregnant wife of 8 years. The Maroon 5 frontman posted to Instagram, quote, "A lot is being said about me right now, and I want to clear the air. I used poor judgment in speaking with anyone other than my wife in any kind of flirtatious manner. I did not have an affair. Nevertheless, I crossed a line during a regrettable period in my life." And you're right. Like, the story is continuing to be updated because before
Instagram model, that Instagram model.
before beginning, this broadcast, I saw that a yoga instructor raised her hand and said, "Me too."
laugh. He's married. His wife is pregnant. That's real life, and they've got to deal with that. And hopefully they're fine. And you never know what's going on behind closed doors, and they're okay, hopefully. But it just is sort of a morality lesson. Like, guys, you can't get away with it. You just can't.
And from the world of chess, we went with, I think, the chess.com coverage on this. Have you paid attention to this?
Marginally,
This story was like #1 at the Wall Street Journal all last week.
Well, you know why? Because of the beads.
Okay, do explain.
Okay, well, evidently there are electronic ways in chess that you can cheat. Little tiny earbuds, a little buzzer put in the sole of your foot, in the sole of your shoe, and then they can somehow a computer off-site can help you make the right move. I don't understand how it all works, but I'm just saying there are electronic means. And there was recently a match where one of the players was accused of using anal beads to electronically stimulate the right answer for chess. Whoa!
You've waited until this part of the program to tell me that story? By the way, I'm thinking of having these installed in the studio.
Excuse me? Installed in the studio? Installed in what in the studio? In whom?
Gonna have them installed in the studio for moments where I feel like you're drifting off and not paying attention to the program.
Listen to what you just said. You cannot say things like that. It's barely enough that I just read the story.
You know that,
what's wrong with
that
you?
red button that Trump had when he wanted a Coke and
Michael,
he would push it?
Excuse me, these are internal. You cannot make a joke about this.
TC, and he would push the button.
Stop.
And everybody who would visit him thought he was, calling for a nuclear strike, and then someone would bring him a Coke. I'm going to have that red button right here.
Okay, listen.
Right here.
HR, hello.
Ladies and gentlemen, please make sure. That is a crazy story.
It's a crazy story. And then, but I mean, the reason now it's in the news again is because then they had a rematch, and the guy who was lost to the teenager then quit after one move as a protest. And the chess world is a fire. It's a flame. There's a lot going on. But that's why it's in the news. I'm telling you.
Oh my God.
Mark my words.
All that makes the cut for Smerconish.com, the newsletter. Make sure that you are subscribed. It's free and it's worthy, and so much time goes into it. All right, please go vote on today's poll question. Is Putin bluffing? Yes or no? See you tomorrow.